Alvin Cullum York, known also by his rank, Sergeant York, was one of the most decorated soldiers of the United States Army in World War I. He received the Medal of Honor for leading an attack on a German machine gun nest, taking 32 machine guns, killing 20 German soldiers, and capturing 132 others. This action occurred during the United States-led portion of the broader Meuse-Argonne offensive in France, masterminded by French Marshal Ferdinand Foch to breach the Hindenburg Line and make the opposing German forces surrender. Background: Alvin Cullum York was born in a two-room log cabin near Pall Mall, Tennessee. He was the third of 11 children born to William Uriah York and Mary Elizabeth York. William Uriah York was born in Jamestown, Tennessee, to Uriah York and Eliza Jane Livingston, both travelers from Buncombe County, North Carolina. Mary Elizabeth York was born in Pall Mall to William Brooks and Nancy Pyle, and was the great-granddaughter of Conrad Coonrod Pyle, an English settler who settled Pall Mall. William York and Mary Brooks married on December 25, 1881, and had 11 children. The York children were, in order, Henry Singleton, Joseph Marion, Alvin Cullum, Samuel John, Albert Hattie, George Alexander, James Preston, Lillian May, Robert Daniel, and Lucy Irma. The York family is of mainly English ancestry, with Scots-Irish ancestry as well. The York family resided in the Indian Creek area of Fentress County. The family was impoverished, with William York working as a blacksmith to supplement the family income. The men of the York family harvested their own food, while the mother made all the family clothing. The York sons attended school for only 9 months and withdrew from education because William York wanted his sons to help him work the family farm, and hunt small game to feed the family. When William York died in November 1911, his son Alvin helped his mother in raising his younger siblings. Alvin was the oldest sibling still residing in the county, since his 2 older brothers had married and relocated. To supplement the family income, York first worked in Harriman, Tennessee, first in railroad construction and then as a logger. By all accounts, he was a very skilled worker who was devoted to the welfare of his family. York was also a violent alcoholic prone to fighting in saloons and accumulated several arrests within the area. His mother, a member of a pacifist Protestant denomination, tried to persuade York to change his ways. Despite his history of drinking and fighting, York attended church regularly and often led the hymn singing. A revival meeting at the end of 1914 led him to a conversion experience on January 1, 1915. His congregation was the Church of Christ in Christian Union, a Protestant denomination that shunned secular politics and disputes between Christian denominations. This church had no specific doctrine of pacifism but had been formed in reaction to the Methodist Episcopal Church South's support for slavery, including armed conflict during the American Civil War, and opposed all forms of violence. In a lecture later in life, he reported his reaction to the outbreak of World War I. "I was worried clean through. I didn't want to go and kill. I believed in my Bible." On June 5, 1917, at the age of 29, Alvin York registered for the draft, as all men between 21 and 31 years of age were required to do on that day. When he registered for the draft, he answered the question, "Do you claim exemption from draft?" by writing, "Yes. Don't want to fight." When his initial claim for conscientious objector status was denied, he appealed. In World War I, conscientious objector status did not exempt one from military duty. Such individuals could still be drafted and were given assignments that did not conflict with their anti-war principles. In November 1917, while York's application was considered, he was drafted and began his Army service at Camp Gordon in Georgia. From the day he registered for the draft until he returned from the war on May 29, 1919, York kept a diary of his activities. In his diary, York wrote that he refused to sign documents provided by his pastor seeking a discharge from the army on religious grounds, and refused to sign similar documents provided by his mother asserting a claim of exemption as the sole support of his mother and siblings. He also disclaimed ever having been a conscientious objector. World War I. York was drafted into the United States Army and served in Company G, 328th Infantry Regiment, 82nd Infantry Division at Camp Gordon, Georgia. Deeply troubled by the conflict between his pacifism and his training for war, he spoke at length with his company commander, Captain Edward Courtney Bullock Danforth of Augusta, Georgia, and his battalion commander, Major Gonzalo Edward Buxton of Providence, Rhode Island, a devout Christian himself. Citing biblical passages about violence, they persuaded York to reconsider the morality of his participation in the war. Granted a 10-day leave to visit home, he returned convinced that God meant for him to fight and would keep him safe. As committed to his new mission as he had been to pacifism, he served with his division in the St. Mihiel offensive, during an attack by his battalion to capture German positions near Hill 223 along the Decauville rail line north of Châtel-Acute-Ry, France. On October 8, 1918, York's actions earned him the Medal of Honor. He recalled, "The Germans got us, and they got us right smart. They just stopped us dead in our tracks. Their machine guns were up there on the heights overlooking us, and well hidden, and we couldn't tell for certain where the terrible heavy fire was coming from. And I'm telling you, they were shooting straight. Our boys just went down like the long grass before the mowing machine at home. Our attack just faded out, and there we were, lying down, about halfway across the valley, and those German machine guns and big shells getting us hard." Under the command of Sergeant Bernard Early, 4 non-commissioned officers, including recently promoted CPL York, and 13 privates were ordered to infiltrate the German lines to take out the machine guns. The group worked their way behind the Germans and overran the headquarters of a German unit, capturing a large group of German soldiers who were preparing a counter-attack against the U.S. troops. Early's men were contending with the prisoners when machine gun fire suddenly peppered the area, killing 6 Americans and wounding 3 others. The fire came from German machine guns on the ridge. The loss of the 9 put Corporal York in charge of the 7 remaining U.S. soldiers. As his men remained under cover, guarding the prisoners, York worked his way into position to silence the German machine guns. York recalled, "And those machine guns were spitting fire and cutting down the undergrowth all around me, something awful. And the Germans were yelling orders. You never heard such a racket in all of your life. I didn't have time to dodge behind a tree or dive into the brush. As soon as the machine guns opened fire on me, I began to exchange shots with them. There were over 30 of them in continuous action, and all I could do was touch the Germans off just as fast as I could. I was sharpshooting. All the time I kept yelling at them to come down. I didn't want to kill any more than I had to. But it was they or I, and I was giving them the best I had." During the assault, 6 German soldiers in a trench near York charged him with fixed bayonets. York had fired all the rounds in his M1917 Enfield rifle, but drew his .45 Colt automatic pistol and shot all 6 soldiers before they could reach him. German First Lieutenant Paul Jürgen Vollmer, commander of the 1st Battalion, 120th Landwehr Infantry, emptied his pistol trying to kill York while he was contending with the machine guns. Failing to injure York, and seeing his mounting losses, he offered in English to surrender the unit to York, who accepted. By the end of the engagement, York and his 7 men marched 132 German prisoners back to the American lines. Upon returning to his unit, York reported to his brigade commander, General Julian R. Lindsay, who remarked, "Well, York, I hear you have captured the whole damn German army." York replied, "No, sir. I got only 132. His actions silenced the German machine guns and were responsible for enabling the 328th Infantry to renew its attack to capture the Decauville Railroad. York was promptly promoted to sergeant, and received the Distinguished Service Cross. A few months later, an investigation by York's chain of command resulted in an upgrade of his Distinguished Service Cross to the Medal of Honor, which was presented by the commanding general of the American Expeditionary Force, General John J. Pershing. The French Republic awarded him the Croix de Guerre and the Legion of Honor. When decorating York with the Croix de Guerre, Marshal Ferdinand Foch told York, "What you did was the greatest thing ever accomplished by any soldier by any of the armies of Europe." In addition to his French medals, Italy awarded York the Croce di Guerra al Merito, and Montenegro decorated him with its War Medal. He eventually received nearly 50 decorations. York's Medal of Honor citation reads, "After his platoon suffered heavy casualties and 3 other non-commissioned officers had become casualties, CPL, York assumed command. Fearlessly leading 7 men, he charged with great daring a machine gun nest which was pouring deadly and incessant fire upon his platoon. In this heroic feat the machine gun nest was taken, together with 4 officers and 128 men and several guns." In attempting to explain his actions during the 1919 investigation that resulted in the Medal of Honor, York told General Lindsay, "A higher power than man guided and watched over me and told me what to do." Lindsay replied, "York, you are right. Valley near Châtel, Ry, France, where Sergeant York fought. 328th Infantry Regiment of 82nd Division advances in preparation to capture Hill 223 on October 7, 1918. York at the Hill, where his actions earned him the Medal of Honor. 3 months after the end of World War I, February 7, 1919. Homecoming and fame. Before leaving France, York was his division's non-commissioned officer delegate to the convention which created the American Legion, of which York was a charter member. York's heroism went unnoticed in the United States press, even in Tennessee, until the publication of the April 26, 1919 issue of the Saturday Evening Post, which had a circulation in excess of 2 million. In an article titled "The Second Elder Gives Battle," journalist George Patullo, who had learned of York's story while touring battlefields earlier in the year, laid out the themes that have dominated York's story ever since. The mountaineer, his religious faith and skill with firearms, patriotic, plain-spoken and unsophisticated, an uneducated man who seems to do everything correctly by intuition. In response, the Tennessee Society, a group of Tennesseans living in New York City, arranged celebrations to greet York upon his return to the United States, including a 5-day furlough to allow for visits to New York City and Washington, D.C. York arrived in Hoboken, NJ, on May 22, stayed at the Waldorf Astoria, and attended a formal banquet in his honor. He toured the subway system in a special car, before continuing to Washington, where the House of Representatives gave him a standing ovation and he met Secretary of War Newton D. Baker and the President's Secretary Joe Tumulty, as President Wilson was still in Paris. York proceeded to Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, where he was discharged from the service, and then to Tennessee for more celebrations. He had been home for barely a week when, on June 7, 1919, York and Gracie Loretta Williams were married by Tennessee Governor Albert H. Roberts in Pall Mall. More celebrations followed the wedding, including a week-long trip to Nashville where York accepted a special medal awarded by the state. York refused many offers to profit from his fame, including thousands of dollars offered for appearances, product endorsements, newspaper articles, and movie rights to his life story. Instead, he lent his name to various charitable and civic causes. To support economic development, he campaigned for the Tennessee government to build a road to service his native region, succeeding when a highway through the mountains was completed in the mid-1920s and named Alvin C. York Highway. The Nashville Rotary organized the purchase, by public subscription, of a 400-acre farm, the one gift that York accepted. However, it was not the fully equipped farm he was promised, requiring York to borrow money to stock it. He subsequently lost money in the farming depression that followed the war. Then the Rotary was unable to continue the installment payments on the property, leaving York to pay them himself. In 1921, he had no option but to seek public help, resulting in an extended discussion of his finances in the press, some of it sharply critical. Debt in itself was a trial. I could get used to most any kind of hardship, but I'm not fitted for the hardship of owing money. Only an appeal to Rotary clubs nationwide and an account of York's plight in the New York World brought in the required contributions by Christmas 1921.